Hello, friends. If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments.
I am Dr. Patricia Holloway, licensed clinical psychologist with 16 years of experience in psychiatric hospital settings. My specialty involves therapeutic interventions for patients experiencing severe dissociative disorders, identity confusion, and reality testing difficulties. These conditions often require innovative treatment approaches that help patients reconnect with their sense of self and distinguish between internal experiences and external reality. At Clearwater State Hospital, we utilized various grounding techniques to help patients with dissociative episodes regain awareness of their physical presence and immediate environment. One particularly effective method involved mirror therapy, having patients observe their reflections while discussing their thoughts, feelings, and perceptions with trained clinical staff. The therapy room contained a large mirror mounted on the wall, positioned so patients could see themselves clearly while sitting in comfortable chairs during session. The mirror served multiple purposes, helping patients recognize their physical self, providing reality anchoring during dissociative episodes, and allowing clinicians to observe patient reactions to their own appearance. For 3 years, mirror therapy produced consistently positive results. Patients with depersonalization disorders reported feeling more connected to their bodies after viewing their reflections. Those experiencing identity confusion found the visual feedback helpful for maintaining sense of self during therapeutic discussions. But in October 2019, patients began reporting unusual observations about their reflections in the therapy room. Mirror. "Doctor, that's not my face," patient Morrison told me during our session. "I mean, it looks like me, but something's wrong with the eyes." I observed Morrison's reflection carefully. Normal appearance, appropriate facial expressions, no obvious distortions or anomalies. But Morrison seemed genuinely disturbed by what he saw in the mirror. "What specifically concerns you about your reflection?" I asked. "The person in the mirror knows things I don't know," he replied. "I can see it in the expression, like he's keeping secrets from me." This response wasn't unusual for patients with dissociative disorders. Mirror confrontation often produces anxiety, identity confusion, or projection of internal conflicts onto reflected images. I documented Morrison's reaction and continued with standard therapeutic protocols. But over the following weeks, multiple patients reported similar disturbances about their mirror reflections. Complaints that their reflection looked different, moved independently, or displayed expressions that didn't match their actual emotions. "My reflection smiled when I was crying," patient Davis reported during her session. "I touched my face to make sure I wasn't smiling, but the mirror person kept smiling anyway." I began paying closer attention to patient reactions during mirror therapy sessions, looking for patterns that might indicate shared psychological phenomena or environmental factors affecting their perceptions. What I observed troubled me deeply. During patient Williams' session on November 15th, I noticed something that challenged my understanding of reflection physics. As Williams gestured with his right hand, his reflection appeared to move the left hand first, creating a brief delay that violated the normal simultaneity of mirror images. I attributed this to visual processing errors or fatigue-related perception problems. But when I mentioned the observation to Williams, he became agitated. "You see it too," he exclaimed. "The mirror person doesn't move at the same time I do. Sometimes he moves first, like he knows what I'm going to do before I do it." I couldn't scientifically confirm Williams's perception, but I'd observed something that didn't align with normal mirror reflection behavior. During the following session, I positioned myself where I could observe both Williams and his reflection simultaneously. The delayed movement occurred again, Williams' actual gesture followed by his reflection's movement approximately half a second later. But when I looked directly at the mirror, the reflection appeared normal. Only in my peripheral vision could I detect the timing discrepancy that both Williams and I had observed. I consulted with Dr. Martinez about the mirror therapy observations, describing the patient reports and my own perceptual anomalies. Patricia, patients with dissociative disorders often project internal conflicts onto external objects, he replied. The mirror becomes a convenient target for their identity confusion. As for your own observations, you're probably unconsciously influenced by their suggestions. That explanation seemed reasonable. Suggestion and confirmation bias could account for my perception of reflection abnormalities. But patient reports continued, and they were becoming more specific and more disturbing. Doctor, there's a woman standing behind you in the mirror, patient Chen told me during our December 3rd session. She's wearing a nurse's uniform, but she looks very old-fashioned. I turned to look behind me, no one there. But when I faced the mirror again, Chen continued staring at the reflection with evident fear. She's still there, Chen whispered. She's trying to say something, but I can't hear her. I saw nothing unusual in the mirror, just Chen and myself. Normal reflections in appropriate positions. But Chen's terror was genuine, and her description was remarkably specific. After the session, I researched Clearwater's history, looking for any deceased staff members who might match Chen's description. Found records of Nurse Margaret Stevens, who'd worked at the hospital from 1967 to 1983, died in 1991. Historical photographs showed her wearing the style of uniform Chen had described, but there was no reason for Chen to know about Nurse Stevens. No way she could have accessed historical information about deceased staff members. During subsequent sessions, patients reported seeing various figures in the mirror that weren't visible in the actual room. Always healthcare workers, always wearing outdated uniforms or clothing, always attempting to communicate something that patients couldn't understand. The old doctor keeps pointing at my chart, patient Rodriguez observed. He looks worried about something, but he can't tell me what's wrong. There's a woman in a white coat standing next to you, patient Thompson reported. She's shaking her head like she disagrees with what you're saying. I began documenting these reports systematically, noting descriptions, apparent time periods of the clothing, and any identifying characteristics patients could provide. The figures consistently matched historical staff members who'd worked at Clearwater decades earlier. On January 8, 2020, I experienced something that fundamentally changed my understanding of the mirror therapy situation. During patient Anderson's session, I glanced at the mirror and saw my own reflection clearly. But standing behind me was a figure I recognized from hospital historical photographs. Dr. James Harrison, who'd been chief of psychiatry at Clearwater from 1971 to 1985, deceased since 1994. Dr. Harrison appeared to be observing our session, taking notes on a clipboard, occasionally nodding or shaking his head in response to my therapeutic interventions. He was clearly visible in the mirror, though no one was standing behind me in the actual room. I tried to continue the session professionally, but Anderson noticed my distraction. You see him too, don't you, doctor? The man with the clipboard? I couldn't deny what I was observing. Dr. Harrison's reflection was as clear as my own, showing details I couldn't possibly have imagined. Specific facial expressions, period-appropriate. Clothing, vintage clipboard that matched historical photographs I'd seen in hospital archives. When I looked directly behind me, I saw nothing. But in the mirror, Dr. Harrison continued observing our session, occasionally making notes that seemed to evaluate my therapeutic techniques. The session ended early. I couldn't maintain professional composure while being observed by the reflection of a psychiatrist who'd been dead for over 25 years. I reported the incident to hospital administration, recommending immediate inspection of the therapy room mirror for potential safety hazards or environmental factors that might be causing visual disturbances. But Maintenance Supervisor Williams found nothing unusual about the mirror itself. Standard reflective glass, properly mounted, no structural defects or optical abnormalities that could account for the reported phenomena. Maybe you need a different mirror, he suggested. This one's been here since the building opened in 1965. Could be showing some age-related problems. But when I researched the mirror's history, I discovered something that made my hands shake. The mirror had been donated to Clearwater in 1965 by the family of Dr. Margaret Whitman, the hospital's first psychiatrist, who died unexpectedly during the facility's construction phase. According to the dedication plaque that had been removed during renovations, the mirror was intended to help patients see themselves clearly and find the strength to face their true reflection. But Dr. Whitman had died before ever using the mirror for patient therapy. The therapeutic tool she'd envisioned had been installed and used for decades by psychiatrists who'd come after her. On February 14th, during what would be my final mirror therapy session, the mirror cracked. Not from impact or structural stress, spontaneous fracture that appeared while patient Davis was observing her reflection. A diagonal crack extending from upper left to lower right, dividing the reflective surface into two triangular sections. But both Davis and I could see that our reflections remained whole and undistorted despite the physical crack in the mirror. The fracture was visible in the glass itself, but didn't affect the reflected images. "Doctor," Davis said quietly, "the people behind you are leaving now. They look sad." I saw them too, in my final clear view of the mirror's reflection. Dozens of healthcare workers in period clothing from different eras, all apparently observing our session, all beginning to fade as the crack spread across the mirror's surface. Dr. Harrison was the last to disappear, nodding respectfully in my direction before his reflection vanished entirely. The cracked mirror remains in the therapy room, though it's no longer used for patient sessions. Administration deemed it a safety hazard due to the fracture, but no one has been assigned to remove or replace it. Sometimes, when I pass the room during routine hospital visits, I notice staff members standing in the doorway, looking at the broken mirror with expressions of curiosity mixed with reluctance to enter. Some therapeutic tools, I've learned, retain the intentions of those who created them, continuing to provide supervision and guidance long after their original practitioners have moved beyond the reach of standard professional consultation. My name is Lisa Chang, and I was a night shift nurse at Maplewood Psychiatric Hospital for 6 years. Night nursing in a psychiatric facility requires constant alertness to patient needs, emergency situations, and the various medical crises that can develop during hours when staffing is minimal and resources are limited. The nurse call system was our primary communication link with patients during night shifts. Each room had a call button that activated a light at the nurse's station and produced an audible alert when patients needed assistance. Simple technology, but essential for patient safety and rapid response to medical emergencies. Room 12 housed Mr. Davidson, a 67-year-old man admitted for severe depression with suicidal ideation. He'd been hospitalized for 3 weeks, receiving medication adjustments and intensive therapy to address the psychological issues that had led to his admission. Davidson was generally cooperative, rarely used his call button, and required standard monitoring for patients with his diagnosis. On January 18, 2020, during my routine night shift, Room 12's call light began blinking at 11:47 p.m. Standard. Procedure required immediate response to all patient calls, particularly from patients with mental health conditions that might indicate medical or psychological emergencies. I went to Room 12 expecting to find Davidson requesting medication, bathroom assistance, or expressing anxiety common among patients with depression. But when I entered the room, I found it empty. Not just unoccupied, completely empty. No patient, no personal belongings, no indication that anyone had been assigned to the room. The bed was stripped down to the mattress, medical equipment had been removed, and the space appeared prepared for deep cleaning. But the call light continued blinking, both in the room and at the nurse's station. I checked the patient roster and room assignments. According to official records, Room 12 had been vacant for 2 weeks, with no patient assigned since the previous occupant had been discharged on January 4th. Yet I had clear memories of caring for Mr. Davidson in Room 12 throughout my recent shifts. Medication administration, routine monitoring, brief conversations about his treatment progress. But according to hospital records, no patient named Davidson had been admitted during the past month. I pressed the call button in Room 12, attempting to reset the system and stop the blinking light. The button clicked normally, but the light continued flashing with steady persistence. I contacted maintenance, reporting a malfunctioning call system in Room 12. Maintenance worker Rodriguez arrived within 30 minutes, bringing standard electrical, testing equipment and replacement parts for call button systems. "Probably just a stuck switch or loose wiring," he said, examining the call button assembly. "These old systems develop problems over time." Rodriguez tested the electrical connections, replaced the call button mechanism, and verified that the U system was functioning properly. But when he finished, the call light resumed blinking immediately. "That's strange," he said, checking his work. "Everything tests normal, but the light won't reset." He tried multiple approaches, different button mechanisms, electrical bypasses, temporary disconnection of the call system. Nothing stopped the persistent blinking light that indicated someone in room 12 was requesting assistance. "I'll need to check the main electrical panel," Rodriguez concluded. "Maybe there's a short in the primary wiring that's causing the malfunction." But examination of the building's electrical systems revealed normal operation. Room 12's call button received proper power, functioned according to specifications, and showed no signs of the electrical problems that might cause persistent activation. Yet, the light continued blinking every night, always beginning at 11:47 p.m. and continuing until approximately 6 a.m. when day shift arrived. Night Supervisor Martinez reviewed the situation, confirming that room 12 was officially vacant and no patient was assigned to the space. "The call system must have a technical problem that maintenance can't identify," she decided. "We'll disable the light until the issue can be resolved." Rodriguez disconnected the electrical power to room 12's call system, physically removing the wires that carried signals from the room to the nurse's station. But the light continued blinking despite having no electrical connection to activate it. "That's impossible," Rodriguez said, examining the disconnected wiring. "There's no power source for this light. It shouldn't be operating at all." But the light persisted, blinking steadily at the nurse's station every night from 11:47 p.m. to 6 a.m., indicating that someone in the vacant room 12 was requesting assistance. Other night shift nurses reported the same phenomenon. The empty room's call light, activated precisely at 11:47 p.m., remained active throughout the night and stopped at dawn regardless of maintenance interventions or electrical disconnections. "It's just a technical glitch," Day Nurse Patterson suggested. "Old buildings have electrical anomalies that are hard to troubleshoot. The light will probably stop malfunctioning eventually." But patients on the ward began reporting disturbances related to room 12's persistent call light. "Someone keeps asking for help," Patient Williams told me during medication rounds. "The voice comes from the empty room, always asking for help." During the night, I couldn't hear any voices from room 12, but Williams and other patients seemed genuinely disturbed by sounds they associated with the vacant room. Patient Garcia reported similar observations. "There's a man in room 12 who keeps calling for nurses, but no one answers him. He sounds very sad and frightened." When I explained that room 12 was empty, Garcia looked confused. "But I can hear him every night. He calls and calls, but nobody comes to help." I began spending time near room 12 during the hours when the call light was active, listening for any sounds that might explain the patient's reports. The room remained silent, but the call light continued its steady blinking, as if someone were pressing the button repeatedly. On February 3rd, I decided to spend an entire night shift in room 12, attempting to understand what was causing the persistent call light activation. I positioned a chair where I could observe the call button mechanism, brought reading material for the long night, and prepared to document any phenomena that might explain the technical malfunction. At 11:47 p.m., the call light began blinking, but I was watching the call button directly, and it wasn't being pressed. The light activated without any mechanical trigger, as if responding to an invisible signal. I tried pressing the button myself, hoping to reset the system. The button clicked normally, but the blinking pattern didn't change. The light continued its steady rhythm, unaffected by my attempts to interrupt the signal. At 2:30 a.m., while sitting in the dark room, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A faint voice, barely audible, saying, "Help me, please." The voice seemed to come from the exact location where a patient's bed would normally be positioned, though the room contained only my chair and the stripped mattress. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone here?" The voice repeated, "Help me, please." I need help. But I was alone in the room. No patient, no visitor, no explanation for the voice I was hearing clearly. I continued hearing the same plea throughout the night, always from the same location, always in the same tone of distress and confusion, as if someone were lying in an invisible hospital bed, repeatedly pressing a call button and asking for assistance that never arrived. At 6:01 a.m., when the call light stopped blinking, the voice fell silent. I reported the experience to administration, describing the persistent call light malfunction and the voices I'd heard during my overnight observation. "Lisa, you've been working too many double shifts," Supervisor Martinez replied. "Exhaustion can cause auditory hallucinations, especially in isolated environments. Take some time off and get proper rest." But other staff members reported similar experiences. Night orderlies heard voices requesting help from room 12. Security guards found the empty room's door standing open despite being locked at the end of each shift. Cleaning staff reported finding personal items in the room that disappeared when supervisors came to investigate. On February 20th, I was transferred to day shift, officially due to scheduling needs, though I suspected my reports about room 12 had influenced the decision. But even during day hours, I could see room 12's call light blinking steadily at the nurse's station display panel, a constant reminder that someone, somewhere, was requesting assistance that our standard protocols couldn't provide. The call light continues blinking every night, despite multiple maintenance interventions, electrical system upgrades, and eventually, the complete removal of room 12's call button mechanism. Hospital staff have learned to ignore the persistent light, treating it as a technical anomaly that can't be resolved through conventional means. But sometimes, during quiet night shifts, nurses report hearing faint voices from room 12, always asking for help, always expressing the same confusion and distress that brought patients to psychiatric hospitals in the first place. Some call systems, I've learned, respond to needs that transcend electrical connections and mechanical switches, and some patients continue requesting assistance long after their official discharge from the care we're trained to provide. I am Dr. Sarah Mitchell, psychiatric resident at Riverside Medical Center. During my second year of residency training, I encountered a case that challenged my understanding of both medical science and psychiatric diagnosis. The patient's condition defied conventional explanation, yet the clinical evidence was undeniable and witnessed by multiple staff members. On November 12, 2019, police brought in a 34-year-old male for psychiatric evaluation following a public disturbance outside the downtown courthouse. The man, identified as Marcus Webb, had been screaming about losing himself and claiming that mirrors no longer worked for him. His behavior was agitated, confused, and potentially dangerous to public safety. Initial assessment revealed a disheveled but otherwise normal-appearing individual experiencing acute psychological distress. Webb was coherent during intake questioning, though his responses indicated possible delusional thinking centered on identity confusion and perceptual disturbances. "Doctor, you have to understand," Webb told me during our first interview. "Something happened to me 3 days ago. I woke up and I couldn't see myself anymore. Not in mirrors, not in windows, not in any reflective surface." I documented his statement as consistent with depersonalization disorder, a condition where patients feel disconnected from their physical self and may report feeling invisible or unreal. The mirror-related delusions seemed consistent with this diagnosis. Webb's medical history was unremarkable. No previous psychiatric admissions, no documented substance abuse, no family history of mental illness. He worked as an accountant, lived alone, and had no recent stressors that might precipitate a psychotic episode. But during routine physical examination, I observed something that troubled me deeply. The examination room contained a large mirror, mounted on the wall for patient assessment purposes. As I conducted standard medical procedures, I noticed that Webb cast no reflection in the mirror. I could see my own reflection clearly, along with medical equipment and room furnishings, but Webb appeared absent from the reflected image. I initially assumed this was a perceptual error caused by lighting conditions or mirror positioning, but when I moved Webb to different locations relative to the mirror, the result remained consistent. No reflection appeared where his image should have been visible. "Mr. Webb, would you look at yourself in the mirror?" He turned toward the mirror with an expression of profound sadness. "I can't see myself, doctor. That's what I've been trying to tell everyone." I looked at the mirror and confirmed what Webb was experiencing. His physical presence was obvious. I could see him clearly, touch him during examination, observe normal vital signs and physical responses, but the mirror showed no reflection of his existence. I called Dr. Martinez, my supervising physician, to observe this unusual phenomenon. "Sarah, what exactly are you asking me to evaluate?" he said when he arrived at the examination room. "The patient's reflection, Dr. Martinez. Look at the mirror." Martinez positioned himself where he could observe both Webb and the mirror simultaneously. His expression changed from skepticism to confusion as he realized that Webb cast no reflection, despite being clearly visible in the room. "This has to be some kind of optical illusion," Martinez said, examining the mirror from different angles. Mirrors don't selectively exclude specific objects, but no matter how we positioned ourselves or adjusted the lighting, Webb remained absent from all reflected images. Medical equipment, furniture, and staff members appeared normally in the mirror, but Webb existed only in direct observation. Martinez ordered comprehensive medical testing, neurological examination, blood chemistry analysis, psychiatric evaluation, and consultation with ophthalmology to rule out vision-related explanations for what we were observing. All tests returned normal results. Webb showed no signs of neurological dysfunction, metabolic abnormalities, or psychiatric conditions that might account for the reflection anomaly. He was physically and mentally healthy, except for the impossible absence of his reflected image. During Webb's 3-day hospitalization, multiple staff members witnessed and documented the reflection phenomenon. Nurses, orderlies, security guards, and visiting physicians all confirmed that Webb cast no reflection in mirrors, windows, or any reflective surface throughout the hospital. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of psychiatric practice," Charge Nurse Thompson told me. "The patient is clearly there, interacting normally, but it's like mirrors can't see him." Webb's psychological state improved during hospitalization as staff validated his experience rather than dismissing it as delusional. He wasn't suffering from perceptual disturbances. He was accurately reporting a condition that defied medical explanation. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm not crazy," he said during our final session. "Something happened to me, something that doesn't make sense, but at least now I know other people can see what I see." I documented Webb's condition extensively, including detailed photographs that should have shown his reflection in hospital mirrors. But when the photographs were developed, they confirmed what we'd observed directly. Webb appeared in person, but remained absent from all reflected surfaces captured in the images. On November 15th, Webb was scheduled for discharge. His psychological distress had resolved. He was no longer agitated or confused, and he expressed readiness to return to his normal activities. But his reflection anomaly persisted, creating practical challenges for daily living in a world filled with reflective surfaces. I completed comprehensive discharge documentation, including detailed descriptions of the reflection phenomenon and recommendations for ongoing psychological support to help Webb adapt to his unusual condition. But the next morning, when I came to complete discharge procedures, Webb was gone. Not discharged through normal channels, simply absent from his room, with no record of when or how he'd left the hospital. Security footage showed no evidence of Webb departing through standard exits, and his personal belongings remained in the room as if he'd simply vanished. More disturbing was what happened to his medical records. The comprehensive documentation I'd created, examination notes, test results, photographs, witness statements from staff, had been completely erased from hospital computer systems. According to official records, no patient named Marcus Webb had ever been admitted. The 3 days of detailed medical documentation had disappeared as thoroughly as Webb's reflection had been absent from mirrors. "Dr. Mitchell, are you having problems with patient documentation?" Supervisor Martinez asked when I reported the missing records. "There's no admission record for anyone named Webb during the past week." I insisted that Webb had been a patient, that multiple staff members had witnessed his condition, that comprehensive medical tests had been performed, but none of my colleagues retained any memory of treating a patient with reflection anomaly. "Sarah, you might be experiencing some stress-related confusion," Martinez suggested. "Residency training is demanding, and it's common for residents to occasionally conflate different cases or create false memories about patients. But I had my personal notes, written in my own handwriting, describing every detail of Webb's condition and treatment. Evidence of a patient who had existed, been examined thoroughly, and documented comprehensively before disappearing from both the hospital and all official records. I researched Webb's background information, trying to verify his identity through external sources. No employment records at the accounting firm he'd mentioned, no apartment lease at the address he'd provided, no driver's license or social security records matching his personal details. It was as if Marcus Webb had never existed outside the 3 days he'd spent in our psychiatric ward, lacking reflection, just as he now lacked any trace in official documentation. Months later, I occasionally see patients who remind me of Webb's physical appearance, but their reflections appear normally in hospital mirrors. Sometimes I wonder if I actually encountered someone whose condition existed beyond our medical understanding, or if the entire experience was a manifestation of my own psychological stress during residency training. But I keep my personal notes about Webb's case, written evidence of a patient who challenged everything I thought I knew about the relationship between physical presence and reflected images. Some conditions, I've learned, affect not just how patients see themselves, but how the world sees them in return. And some medical mysteries resolve themselves by disappearing completely from the records we use to document what should be remembered. My name is Janet Morrison, and I was the charge nurse for the secure unit at Westfield State Psychiatric Hospital for 11 years. The secure unit housed patients requiring intensive supervision due to violent behavior, severe psychotic episodes, or risk of self-harm. When patients posed immediate danger to themselves or others, they were placed in seclusion rooms under strict monitoring protocols that required documentation every 15 minutes. Seclusion logging was one of our most critical responsibilities. State regulations mandated precise records of patient condition, vital signs, attempts at verbal de-escalation, and any changes in behavior that might indicate readiness for return to general population. These logs were reviewed by supervisors, state inspectors, and legal authorities if questions arose about patient treatment. On March 8, 2020, we placed patient Richardson in seclusion room 3 following an aggressive episode during group therapy. Richardson had attacked another patient without warning, required physical restraint by security staff, and showed signs of acute paranoid psychosis that made him unsuitable for normal ward activities. Richardson was a 41-year-old man with a long history of schizoaffective disorder, multiple previous hospitalizations, and documented episodes of violence during psychotic decompensation. His current admission resulted from a public disturbance involving threats against government officials and claims that federal agents were monitoring his thoughts. Standard seclusion procedure required continuous observation for the first 4 hours, with detailed logging every 15 minutes documenting patient behavior, attempts at communication, vital signs, and any interventions provided by nursing staff. I began Richardson's seclusion log at 2:15 p.m., noting his agitated state, rapid breathing, and continued verbal expressions of paranoid delusions. He paced continuously within the small room, occasionally striking the padded walls, and refused all attempts at verbal de-escalation. 15 p.m., patient placed in seclusion following aggressive incident. Agitated, pacing, refusing verbal interaction. Vital signs: BP 140/90, HR 95, RR 22. J. Morrison, RN 2:30 p.m. Patient continues pacing, appears to be responding to internal stimuli. No verbal response to staff attempts at communication. Vital signs: stable. J. Morrison, RN 2:45 p.m. No change in behavior. Patient striking walls, muttering incomprehensibly. Water offered, refused. J. Morrison, RN standard documentation that reflected Richardson's expected behavior during acute psychotic episodes. But by 4 p.m., his demeanor began changing in ways that seemed inconsistent with his previous patterns. The p.m., patient appears calmer, ceased pacing, sitting quietly in corner, appears to be listening to something. No obvious external stimuli present. J. Morrison, RN Richardson, had stopped his agitated pacing and assumed a position of attentive listening, as if someone were speaking to him in conversation tones. But seclusion rooms contain no audio systems, no communication devices, and no way for patients to hear voices from outside the secure area. 15 p.m. Patient remains seated, occasionally nodding as if agreeing with speaker. When asked who he's listening to, patient responds, "The names. They're telling me the names." J. Morrison, RN. "What names?" I asked, through the observation window. "Margaret Stevens, James Patterson, Dorothy Chen." Richardson replied clearly. "They want to make sure I remember them correctly. These names meant nothing to me. Not staff members, not patients I recognized, not individuals Richardson had mentioned during previous admissions. But he repeated them with careful precision, as if memorizing important information. 30 p.m. Patient continues listing names. Robert Martinez, Helen Thompson, David Williams. Claims these individuals are important for the records. No agitation, vital signs normal. J. Morrison, RNI, completed my shift at 7 p.m., turning Richardson's care over to night shift nurse Patricia Wong. But when I reviewed the seclusion log the following morning, I found entries that troubled me deeply. The log contained detailed observations extending through the entire night, documented every 15 minutes as required by regulations. But several entries were signed by staff, members who hadn't been scheduled for duty. Gauss 45 p.m. Patient resting quietly, vital signs stable. Names recitation continues periodically. Sarah Johnson, Michael Davis, Linda Rodriguez, K. Stevens, RN 12 RJM. No change in condition. Patient appears comfortable. No signs of distress. Continues whispering names in organized sequence. K. Stevens, RN, but K. Stevens hadn't worked at Westfield for over 3 years, having transferred to a different facility in 2017. Yet multiple entries throughout the night were signed with her name, documented in handwriting that appeared to match her style. 15 a.m. Patient sleeping peacefully. Vital signs normal. When awake, continues reciting names with careful attention to pronunciation. R. Harrison, RNR. Harrison had died in 2018, 2 years before Richardson's admission. But the log contained extensive entries signed with Harrison's name, documenting detailed observations of Richardson's condition throughout the night. I questioned night nurse Wong about the mysterious log entries. Patricia, who actually conducted Richardson's seclusion monitoring last night. I did, following standard protocol, she replied. Every 15 minutes, just like the regulations require. The log shows entries signed by Stevens and Harrison. Were they here last night? Wong looked confused. Janet, I don't know anyone named Stevens or Harrison. I made all the entries myself, signed with my own name. But when I showed her the log, Wong's expression changed to concern. These aren't my entries, she said, examining the handwriting. I documented Richardson's condition, but these signatures aren't mine. I compared Wong's normal handwriting to the mysterious entries. The documentation styles were completely different, suggesting multiple people had been monitoring Richardson, despite Wong's insistence that she'd worked alone. More entries appeared over the following days, all signed by staff members who were either off duty, transferred to other facilities, or deceased. But each entry demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of Richardson's condition, appropriate medical observations, and proper seclusion monitoring protocols. Day 2, 6:30 a.m. Patient awake, alert, cooperative. Name recitation has become more organized, listing individuals by apparent time periods. Vital signs normal. Monsieur Blackwood, MD Doctor. Monsieur Blackwood had been Westfield's chief psychiatrist from 1985 to 1995, deceased since 2003. Yet his signature appeared on Richardson's seclusion log, documenting medical observations with the expertise and attention to detail he'd been known for during his tenure. Richardson's condition remained stable throughout his seclusion period, but his behavior became increasingly focused on the systematic recitation of names. He would spend hours carefully pronouncing unfamiliar names, occasionally asking invisible speakers to repeat information so he could document it accurately. Richardson, who's giving you these names? I asked during one of my monitoring visits. The staff, he replied simply. They want to make sure their names are remembered correctly in the records. What staff? There's no one here but me. The nurses, the doctors, the orderlies. Everyone who worked here. They're worried their names will be forgotten if someone doesn't write them down properly. I researched the names Richardson had been reciting, cross-referencing them with Westfield's employment records, dating back to the hospital's opening in 1963. Every name he mentioned matched former staff members, listed in chronological order according to their years of service. But Richardson had no access to personnel records, no way to obtain comprehensive information about decades of hospital employees. Yet he continued reciting names with remarkable accuracy, providing details about job positions, length of service, and even personal information about staff members he'd never met. Day 5, 2:15 p.m. Patient completing systematic review of hospital staff names from 1963 present. Pronunciation careful, details accurate according to personnel records. Vital signs stable. T. Chen, RNT. Chen had worked at Westfield from 1998 to 2006, transferred to another facility years before Richardson's admission. But Chen's signature appeared regularly in the seclusion log, documenting Richardson's progress with the same professionalism he'd demonstrated during his actual employment. On March 15th, Richardson's name recitation reached the present era. He began listing current staff members, including details about our work schedules, personal backgrounds, and professional qualifications that he shouldn't have known. Janet Morrison, charge. Nurse, 11 years of service, he said during my evening monitoring visit. Specializes in secure unit management, experienced with seclusion protocols. He continued through the entire current staff roster, providing accurate information about employees he'd never met, positions he'd never been told about, and personal details that weren't part of his medical records. Day 7, 8 p.m. Patient completing final staff name documentation. All personnel from hospital's operational history, now recorded. Patient appears satisfied with completion of task. J. Morrison, R.N. Richardson's name recitation ended that evening. He'd systematically documented every individual who'd ever worked at Westfield, spanning 57 years of hospital operation, with accuracy that hospital administration confirmed against comprehensive personnel records. But on March 16th, when I arrived for my morning shift, Richardson was found unresponsive in seclusion room 3. Medical examination revealed no obvious cause of death, no signs of trauma, no indication of medical emergency, no evidence of self-harm. Richardson had simply stopped breathing during the night, his vital signs ceasing as quietly as his name recitation had concluded. The final entry in his seclusion log was signed by Richardson himself. Day 8, 3:27 a.m. Task completed. All names properly documented for permanent record. Staff roster preservation accomplished. End of assignment. W. Richardson. Richardson's handwriting was clear, professional, and completely different from his usual chaotic scrawl during psychotic episodes. The entry was calm, organized, and written with the competence of someone completing important administrative work. I've kept Richardson's seclusion log, along with the comprehensive list of names he documented during his final week. Sometimes I wonder if his psychotic episode was actually a form of institutional memory preservation, ensuring that every person who'd contributed to Westfield's operation would be remembered in official records. Some patients, I've learned, serve purposes beyond their individual treatment needs, and some seclusion periods allow individuals to complete work that transcends their personal psychiatric conditions, documenting histories that might otherwise be lost when institutions close and staff members are forgotten. My name is Carlos Rivera, and I worked as an orderly at Pine Valley Psychiatric Hospital for 4 years. Orderly duties included patient transport, facility maintenance, supply distribution, and general support for nursing staff throughout the hospital's 3 main buildings. The work required familiarity with the facility's layout, which included numerous interconnected corridors that could be confusing for new employees. The hospital's main building contained Ward C, a long corridor that connected the east and west wings through a central hallway approximately 200 feet in length. This corridor served as a primary route for staff movement between wings, and was used regularly for patient transport, meal delivery, and routine facility operations. Ward C's design was straightforward, a single hallway with patient rooms along both sides, nursing station at the midpoint, and exit doors at each end providing access to the east and west wings. Standard institutional layout that I'd navigated hundreds of times during my employment. On February 22, 2021, I was assigned to transport supplies from the West Wing storage area to the East Wing medication room. This required carrying medical supplies through Ward C's corridor, a routine task that typically took 5 to 7 minutes depending on the weight of the materials being transported. My colleague, Antonio Vasquez, was simultaneously assigned to transport laundry from the East Wing to the West Wing, using the same corridor, but traveling in the opposite direction. We coordinated our timing to avoid congestion, with Antonio entering from the east while I entered from the west. At 2:15 p.m. I entered Ward C from the West Wing door, carrying a box of medical supplies intended for the East Wing medication room. The corridor appeared normal. Patient rooms on both sides, nursing station at the midpoint, exit door visible at the far end. I began walking toward the East Wing, expecting to encounter Antonio coming from the opposite direction sometime around the corridor's midpoint. But as I continued walking, the East Wing door seemed to remain at the same distance despite my steady progress forward. After what felt like 10 minutes of walking, I still hadn't reached the midpoint nursing station. The corridor stretched ahead of me unchanged, with the same patient room doors, the same institutional lighting, the same view of the distant exit door that never seemed to get closer. I stopped walking and looked back toward the West Wing entrance. It was no longer visible behind me. The corridor extended in both directions as far as I could see, with no indication of the entrance I'd used or the exit I was trying to reach. But I could see Antonio in the distance ahead of me, walking in my direction, carrying his laundry cart. He appeared to be making normal progress, but despite both of us walking toward each other, the distance between us remained constant. I called out to Antonio. "How long have you been walking?" His voice echoed from the distance. "About 15 minutes. This corridor is longer than I remembered." We continued walking toward each other for what felt like another 20 minutes, but neither of us seemed to get closer to the other. The corridor maintained its standard appearance, but the dimensions had apparently changed to accommodate our extended journey. I tried reaching one of the patient rooms to ask for directions or assistance, but when I approached room 214, the ductor handle wouldn't turn. Not locked. The handle simply wouldn't engage, as if it were painted in place rather than functionally installed. Antonio reported the same experience with doors on his side of the corridor. "Carlos, none of these doors work. They look normal, but I can't open any of them." We agreed to turn around and return to our respective starting points, abandoning the supply transport until we could understand what was happening with Ward C's layout. But when I turned around and began walking back toward where the West Wing entrance should have been, I found myself walking away from Antonio rather than toward the exit. The corridor continued indefinitely in both directions, with no landmarks or reference points to indicate progress. I walked for approximately 30 minutes in what I believed was the direction of the West Wing entrance. But I never reached an exit door, never found the nursing station, never encountered any features that would indicate I was making progress through the corridor. Antonio's voice continued echoing from the distance, always seeming to come from the same relative position despite both of us moving continuously. "Carlos, I can't find the exit doors. This corridor doesn't end." I began checking my watch regularly, documenting the time I'd spent in Ward C. But the numbers became confusing. According to my watch, I'd been walking for 3 hours, though my subjective experience suggested only 30 or 40 minutes had passed. At 5:30 p.m., according to my timepiece, I decided to stop walking and wait for assistance. Surely someone would notice that Antonio and I had been missing from our duties for over 3 hours and send help. But when I stopped moving, I could no longer see Antonio. The corridor stretched empty in both directions, with no sign of my colleague, or any other staff members. I remained stationary for what felt like another hour, expecting someone to find me. But Ward C remained empty, silent, extending infinitely without exit doors or intersection points that might provide alternative routes. Finally, I heard voices calling my name from what sounded like a great distance. "Carlos, Antonio, where are you?" I called back. "In Ward C. We can't find the exit doors." The voices grew closer, and eventually I saw Supervisor Martinez and Security Officer Davis approaching from what appeared to be the East Wing direction. "Carlos, what are you doing?" Martinez asked when they reached me. "You've been standing in one spot for 20 minutes, staring down an empty corridor." I looked around. I was standing near the West Wing entrance to Ward C, exactly where I'd started my supply transport assignment. The corridor showed its normal proportions: 200 feet long, nursing station at midpoint, East Wing exit clearly visible at the far end. "I've been walking for hours," I insisted. The corridor was endless, and I couldn't reach Antonio or find the exit doors. Martinez checked his watch. "Carlos, it's 2:35 p.m. You've been missing from your duties for 20 minutes, not hours, but..." My watch showed 5:47 p.m., indicating I'd spent over 3 hours in Ward C's impossible corridor. Security Officer Davis reviewed the surveillance footage from Ward C's cameras. The recording showed Antonio and me entering the corridor from opposite ends at 2:15 p.m., walking a few steps, then standing motionless for approximately 20 minutes before Martinez and Davis came to investigate. According to the video, neither Antonio nor I had walked more than 10 feet into the corridor. We'd both stopped almost immediately after entering and remained stationary until help arrived. But Antonio's experience matched mine exactly. Hours of walking through an endless corridor, attempting to reach each other without success, being unable to find exit doors or functional room entrances. "The video must be wrong," Antonio insisted. "I walked for at least 2 hours, trying to reach Carlos and find the West Wing exit." His watch also showed incorrect time, nearly 4 hours later than the actual time according to hospital clocks. Supervisor Martinez reviewed Ward C's maintenance records, looking for structural changes or environmental factors that might have affected our perception of the corridor's dimensions. "Nothing unusual," he reported. "Standard corridor, 200 feet long, no recent modifications." The surveillance video shows normal activity, but Antonio and I both retained clear memories of spending hours in an impossibly extended version of Ward C, unable to reach each other despite walking continuously in opposite directions. We were both reassigned to different duties, avoiding Ward C for the remainder of our employment. But other staff members occasionally reported similar experiences, entering the corridor and finding it longer than expected, spending extended time trying to reach destinations that should have been quickly accessible. The incidents were always brief according to surveillance cameras and witness observations, but staff members involved reported subjective experiences of hours spent in corridors that had temporarily expanded beyond their architectural limits. He transferred to a different hospital 6 months later, citing schedule conflicts, though the real reason was my reluctance to work in a building where corridors could change length without warning. Some institutional spaces, I've learned, expand to accommodate whatever duration is needed for employees to complete their assigned duties, regardless of the time constraints imposed by normal architectural dimensions. I am Dr. Michael Torres, staff psychiatrist at Riverside Psychiatric Institute. For 8 years, I've conducted intake interviews with newly admitted patients, assessing their mental status, determining appropriate treatment protocols, and creating comprehensive records that guide therapeutic interventions throughout their hospitalization. Our facility utilizes video recording equipment for training purposes, allowing resident physicians and nursing students to observe professional intake procedures without disrupting the therapeutic relationship between doctor and patient. These recordings require patient consent and are stored securely according to strict confidentiality protocols. On April 14, 2021, I was scheduled to conduct an intake interview with a new admission, though the patient's name and details weren't immediately available due to administrative processing delays. Emergency admissions sometimes arrive with incomplete paperwork, requiring clinicians to gather essential information during the initial assessment session. I set up the recording equipment in Interview Room 3, a standard procedure for sessions that would be used for educational purposes. The camera was positioned to capture both patient and clinician perspectives, while maintaining appropriate privacy boundaries. At 10:30 a.m., I began what I believed would be a routine intake interview, though I have no clear memory of the patient. Entering the room were the initial phases of our conversation, but 3 days later, when I reviewed the recording for training curriculum development, I found footage that challenged my understanding of the entire session. The video showed me conducting a comprehensive intake interview with a middle-aged man I didn't recognize. The patient appeared calm, cooperative, and answered questions with appropriate detail about his psychological history, current symptoms, and circumstances leading to his hospitalization. "Can you tell me what brought you to the hospital today?" my recorded voice asked. "I've been experiencing increasing anxiety over the past month," the patient replied. "Panic attacks, insomnia, difficulty concentrating at work. My family became concerned when I started talking about feeling like I wasn't real anymore." The interview continued for 47 minutes, covering standard intake topics: mental health history, medication background, family psychiatric history, substance use assessment, and current symptoms. Both the patient and I appeared professional, engaged, and following appropriate clinical protocols, but I had no memory of conducting this interview. The patient described symptoms consistent with depersonalization disorder, provided detailed personal history, and demonstrated clear thinking throughout the assessment. He appeared to be a legitimate psychiatric admission requiring standard treatment interventions. Yet when I checked our admission records for April 14th, no patient matching his description had been processed through our facility. I reviewed the patient census, intake logs, and administrative files. No record of admitting anyone who matched the individual in the video recording. According to official documentation, I hadn't conducted any intake interviews on April 14th. But the video evidence was undeniable. 47 minutes of comprehensive psychiatric assessment conducted in our standard interview room using proper clinical protocols and resulting in appropriate diagnostic impressions. I brought the recording to Dr. Williams, our clinical director, requesting assistance in identifying the patient and locating his admission paperwork. "Michael, I don't show any intake interviews scheduled for you on April 14th, Dr. Williams said, reviewing the appointment calendar. "You were assigned to group therapy sessions and chart reviews that day." I showed him the video recording. "But here's clear evidence of a comprehensive intake assessment. The patient appears legitimate, the clinical content is appropriate, and the session follows standard protocols." Dr. Williams watched the entire recording carefully, noting the professional quality of the assessment and the apparent authenticity of the patient's responses. "This is excellent clinical work," he observed. "But I don't recognize the patient, and we have no admission record for anyone matching his description." We contacted administration, requesting a comprehensive search of all patient records for individuals who might match the mystery patient's description. The search included discharged patients, transferred cases, and emergency holds that might not have been processed through standard channels. No matches found. The patient in the video appeared to have never been admitted to our facility, despite clear evidence of a detailed intake assessment conducted in our interview room. More puzzling was my complete lack of memory regarding the session. I could remember other activities from April 14th, group therapy sessions, administrative meetings, chart reviews, but the 47-minute intake interview had vanished from my recollection. Could this be someone else using interview room 3? I asked Dr. Williams. We checked the room scheduling logs. Room 3 was assigned to me from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. on April 14th for intake interview purposes. No other clinicians were authorized to use the room during that time frame. The recording equipment showed no signs of tampering or unauthorized use. The video was properly formatted, time-stamped correctly, and stored in the appropriate location within our security system. But the patient remained unidentifiable, and I remained unable to recall conducting the interview. I consulted with our IT department, wondering if the recording might be from a different date or had been misfiled from another clinician's sessions. Dr. Torres, the metadata shows this recording was created on April 14th at 10:30 a.m. using your login credentials, the technician reported. The video is authentic, unedited, and matches the specifications of your standard interview recordings. We expanded our search to include patients from other psychiatric facilities in the region, wondering if the mystery patient might have been transferred from another hospital with incomplete documentation. No matches found in the regional psychiatric, Database. The patient appeared to exist only in the 47-minute video recording. Dr. Williams suggested I review the clinical content more carefully, looking for clues that might help identify the patient or explain how the recording had been created. Without my conscious participation, I studied the video obsessively, analyzing every detail of the patient's responses, looking for inconsistencies or signs that might indicate the nature of this impossible documentation. The patient's clinical presentation was entirely consistent with depersonalization disorder. His symptoms, history, and psychological state suggested genuine psychiatric distress requiring appropriate treatment. There was nothing artificial or deceptive about his responses, but his personal details didn't correspond to any real individual. The address he provided didn't exist, the employer he mentioned wasn't listed in business directories, and the family members he referenced couldn't be located through any available records. It was as if someone had created a perfectly realistic psychiatric patient who existed only during the 47 minutes of our recorded interview. On May 15th, exactly 1 month after the mysterious recording, I found something that made my hands shake. A second video file in my intake interview folder. The new recording showed the same patient, same interview room, same clinical assessment. But this time, the session was dated May 15th, and I again had no memory of conducting the interview. The patient appeared unchanged. Same symptoms, same history, same professional demeanor. But his responses suggested awareness of our previous session. "Dr. Torres, I want to thank you for the assessment we conducted last month," he said during the opening minutes. "Your diagnostic impressions were very helpful for my understanding of the depersonalization symptoms. But according to hospital records, no patient matching his description had ever received treatment at our facility. No follow-up appointments had been scheduled, no treatment plans had been implemented, no ongoing care had been provided. Yet the patient referred to our previous session with specific details that matched the recorded interview exactly. I contacted Dr. Williams immediately, reporting the second impossible recording and requesting immediate investigation of our video recording systems. "Michael, are you feeling all right?" Dr. Williams asked. "You seem concerned about routine interview recordings. These appear to be standard intake assessments with appropriate clinical content." But when Dr. Williams reviewed the recordings, he expressed the same confusion about the unidentifiable patient and my lack of memory regarding the sessions. The recordings continued appearing monthly. Same patient, same interview room, same clinical quality, but with no corresponding admission records or conscious memory of conducting the assessments. Each session built upon previous interviews, suggesting ongoing therapeutic relationship with a patient, who existed only in video documentation. By September, I had documented 5 comprehensive intake interviews with the mystery patient, totaling over 4 hours of clinical assessment time that I couldn't remember, and that wasn't reflected in any official hospital records. I requested transfer to a different facility, citing concerns about memory issues and the need for medical evaluation. But I kept copies of the impossible recordings, evidence of clinical work that transcended my conscious participation in the therapeutic process. Some therapeutic relationships, I've learned, exist in dimensions beyond standard documentation and conscious memory. And some patients require assessment and treatment that can only be provided by clinicians willing to participate in sessions they'll never remember conducting. My name is Rebecca Martinez, head nurse for the night shift at Cedarbrook Psychiatric Hospital. Over 13 years of psychiatric nursing, I've supervised patient care during overnight hours when staffing is minimal and medical emergencies require rapid response from experienced personnel. Night shift nursing demands vigilance, clinical expertise, and careful coordination of limited resources to ensure patient safety. During the summer of 2020, our night shift staff began reporting sightings of an unidentified woman in hospital corridors. The figure appeared to be a healthcare professional, middle-aged, wearing a pristine white nursing gown that was reminiscent of uniforms from earlier decades, and carrying a clipboard as if conducting routine patient assessments. Initial reports came from orderlies during their routine security rounds. "Ms. Martinez, there's a nurse on Ward B that I don't recognize," Orderly Jackson told me during shift briefing. "Older woman, Very professional looking, but she's not wearing a current ID badge. Hospital policy required all staff to display current identification badges with photographs and security access codes. Unauthorized personnel were prohibited from patient care areas, and security would escort anyone lacking proper credentials from the premises. "Did you speak with her?" I asked. I tried, but she was walking away when I saw her, moved very purposefully, like she had specific duties to complete. I reviewed the night shift schedule. 3 nurses assigned to Ward B, all accounted for and wearing proper identification. No additional nursing staff had been scheduled, and no agency nurses had been contracted for temporary coverage. Maybe it was someone from day shift staying late to complete documentation, I suggested, though shift change protocols made this unlikely. But sightings of the unidentified woman continued throughout the week. Different staff members, different locations but consistent descriptions. Professional healthcare worker in white gown, carrying clipboard, moving with obvious purpose through patient care areas. She was checking patient rooms, reported night nurse Chen after her rounds on Ward C. Going from door to door, making notes on her clipboard. Very systematic approach. Did you see her face clearly? Not really. She was always moving away when I noticed her. And the corridor lighting isn't great during night hours. I began conducting additional supervisory rounds, attempting to identify the mysterious figure and determine whether we had unauthorized personnel accessing patient areas. But during my extended patrols, I saw no one matching the described appearance. On July 18th, I encountered the woman myself. During my 3 a.m. rounds, I saw her at the end of Ward A's corridor, examining a patient chart outside room 12. She appeared, exactly as staff had described. Older woman in pristine white nursing gown. Professional demeanor, clipboard in hand, conducting routine nursing duties. I approached quickly, intending to verify her credentials and determine her authorization for patient care access. "Excuse me," I called out. "I need to see your identification." The woman looked up from the chart briefly, made a final notation on her clipboard, and walked briskly toward the stairwell. I followed, but when I reached the stairwell door, she was gone. No footsteps on the stairs. No indication of which direction she'd taken. But outside room 12, I found something that troubled me deeply. Detailed nursing notes written in handwriting I didn't recognize, documenting patient observations that were remarkably comprehensive and clinically accurate. Patient Morrison, room 12. Increased agitation during evening hours, refusing medication, expressing paranoid ideation about staff intentions. Recommend psychiatric consultation and medication adjustment. Monitor closely for potential aggressive behavior. The observations were precisely accurate. Morrison had been increasingly difficult during recent shifts, showing resistance to treatment and signs of escalating paranoid symptoms. But no staff member had documented these concerns in such detail. I checked the signatures on nursing notes from recent shifts. None matched the handwriting on the anonymous documentation found outside room 12. The following night, I positioned myself where I could observe Ward A's corridor continuously, determined to identify the mysterious woman and understand her unauthorized presence in patient care areas. At 2:47 a.m., I saw her emerge from room 8, carrying her clipboard and moving with the same purposeful demeanor staff had reported. This time I was close enough to observe her clearly. The woman appeared to be in her 50s, with gray hair arranged in a neat professional style typical of experienced nurses. Her white gown was immaculate, pressed to crisp perfection, and reminiscent of nursing uniforms from the 1960s or 1970s. But she wore no identification badge, no hospital nameplate, no security access card that would indicate authorized employment. I followed her discreet distance, watching as she stopped at room 15, consulted her clipboard, and made additional notations while observing the sleeping patient through the door window. When she moved to room 18, I approached close enough to see her writing. The handwriting was neat, professional, and documented detailed patient observations. Patient Davis, room 18, responding well to current medication regimen, sleeping peacefully. Vital signs, stable during overnight monitoring. Continue current. Treatment plan. The observation was accurate, but no authorized staff member had conducted such detailed assessment of patient Davis during the night shift. "Excuse me," I said, approaching from behind. The woman turned slightly, acknowledged my presence with a professional nod, then continued walking toward the nurse's station. But when I reached the nurse's station, she was nowhere to be seen. On her clipboard, left on the counter, I found comprehensive nursing notes for every patient on Ward A. Detailed observations, medication assessments, behavioral notations, and treatment recommendations. All written in the same neat handwriting, all clinically appropriate and remarkably thorough. But at the bottom of the documentation, I found something that made my blood run cold. Patient Thompson, room 23. Critical status anticipated. Recommend. Immediate physician consultation. Probable cardiac event within 24 hours. Prepare for emergency intervention. Patient Thompson had shown no signs of medical distress during standard monitoring. His vital signs were normal, his psychiatric condition was stable, and he'd given no indication of physical health problems. But the anonymous documentation predicted a cardiac emergency with specific timing and clinical detail that seemed impossible to determine through routine observation. I immediately checked on Thompson. He was sleeping peacefully, breathing normally, showing no signs of distress. But I documented the mysterious prediction and increased monitoring protocols as a precautionary measure. At 4:23 a.m. the following morning, patient Thompson experienced sudden cardiac arrest. Emergency medical intervention was successful due to rapid response, but Thompson required immediate transfer to intensive care for cardiac monitoring and treatment. The prediction found on the mysterious clipboard had been accurate to within hours. I reported the incident to hospital administration, describing the unidentified woman, the detailed nursing documentation, and the accurate prediction of Thompson's medical emergency. "Rebecca, are you suggesting that unauthorized personnel are accessing patient areas and somehow predicting medical crises?" Administrator Johnson asked skeptically. The explanation sounded impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Comprehensive nursing notes written by someone with no official employment, clinical observations that exceeded the detail of standard documentation, and medical predictions that proved accurate. Security reviewed surveillance footage from Ward A during the timeframes when the woman had been observed. The cameras showed authorized staff members conducting routine duties, but no footage of an unidentified woman in white gown. The video shows only scheduled nursing staff, Security Supervisor Davis reported. No unauthorized personnel appear in any of the recorded footage. But staff continued reporting sightings of the woman, and detailed nursing notes continued appearing throughout the facility. Always the same professional handwriting, always comprehensive clinical observations, always signed with initials that didn't match any current employee. On August 15th, I found a note that contained information about my own performance. Supervisor Martinez demonstrates excellent clinical judgment and staff leadership. Recommendation for administrative advancement appropriate. Consider promotion to Assistant Director of Nursing Services. The following week, I was approached by administration about advancement opportunities within the hospital's nursing leadership structure. Some healthcare professionals, I've learned, continue their duties long after their official employment has ended, providing patient care that transcends the limitations of standard work schedules and authorized personnel rosters. And some clinical documentation is created by nurses who understand that patient safety requires supervision that extends beyond the boundaries of conventional staffing patterns. My name is Margaret Chen, and I served as night shift supervisor at Hillview Psychiatric Hospital for 9 years. One of my primary responsibilities was completing the daily census count, documenting the exact number of patients present in each ward during overnight hours. This information was essential for staffing calculations, resource allocation, and state reporting requirements that determined hospital operating licenses. Census counting was straightforward but critical work. Each patient room required verification of occupancy. Empty beds needed documentation, and any discrepancies had to be investigated immediately. State regulations mandated precise patient counts, and hospitals faced serious consequences for inaccurate reporting. Ward 3 housed our long-term psychiatric patients, individuals requiring extended treatment for severe mental health conditions. The ward contained 32 beds arranged in single occupancy rooms, with typical occupancy rates ranging between 28 and 30 patients depending on admissions, discharges, and transfers. For 8 years, my census counts for Ward 3 matched physical reality. Occupied rooms correlated with patient census, empty beds aligned with available capacity, and total numbers reflected actual conditions observed during nightly rounds. But in November 2019, I began noticing persistent discrepancies in Ward 3's census numbers. My physical count of occupied rooms consistently showed 29 patients present, but when I completed the official census documentation, the form always indicated 30 patients total. Initially, I assumed I was making counting errors during routine rounds. Psychiatric hospital work is demanding. Night shifts can be exhausting, and simple mathematical mistakes are common during repetitive tasks. I began double-checking my counts, using systematic approaches to ensure accuracy, walking each corridor, methodically, marking room numbers on paper, verifying occupancy through direct observation of sleeping patients. The physical count remained consistent. 29 occupied rooms, 3 vacant beds, total patient population of 29 individuals. But the official census form continued showing 30 patients, regardless of my careful verification procedures. "Margaret, your census numbers don't match the admission logs," Administrator Williams mentioned during our weekly supervisory meeting. "You're reporting 30 patients in Ward 3, but our records show only 29 current admissions," I explained. The discrepancy I'd been observing. "Sir, I physically count 29 patients during rounds, but the census form somehow shows 30 when I complete the documentation. Are you sure you're counting correctly? Census accuracy is essential for state compliance." I was certain of my counting methodology, but I couldn't explain why the written documentation differed from my observed reality. Williams suggested I bring additional staff to verify the census count, ensuring that multiple observers confirmed the patient population before submitting official reports. The next evening, I asked Night Nurse Thompson to accompany me during Ward 3 census rounds. We walked each corridor together, verified room occupancy collaboratively, and maintained careful count throughout the process. 29 patients present, Thompson confirmed after our systematic review. Rooms 301, 315, and 327 are vacant. All other rooms are occupied. But when we completed the census form together, both of us writing simultaneously, the document showed 30 patients total. "That's impossible," Thompson said, checking our paperwork. "We both counted 29, but the form indicates 30. We repeated the count twice more, achieving identical results. Physical observation showed 29 patients, but official documentation reflected 30. "Maybe there's a problem with the census forms," Thompson suggested. "Could be a printing error or administrative mistake." I requested new census forms from administration, hoping that fresh paperwork might resolve the mathematical discrepancy. But the new forms produced identical results. Regardless of actual patient count, the documentation consistently showed one additional individual. In December, the discrepancy intensified when I discovered something that challenged my understanding of the entire situation. During routine rounds, I found a patient in room 300, a room that didn't exist according to hospital floor plans. Room numbers in Ward 3 began with 301 and continued sequentially through 332. There was no room 300 on any architectural drawing, fire safety plan, or administrative documentation, but the room existed physically. Standard patient accommodation with bed, furniture, and medical equipment identical to other rooms throughout the ward, and it was occupied. An elderly man, approximately 70 years old, sleeping peacefully in the bed. He appeared to be a legitimate psychiatric patient. Hospital gown, medical identification bracelet, chart holder on the door containing detailed treatment records. I examined the medical chart. Patient 0, according to the identification system, admitted for census maintenance duties with no discharge date specified. The documentation was comprehensive, professionally written, but contained information that made no sense within standard psychiatric care protocols. Patient demonstrates excellent compliance with institutional requirements. Primary function involves maintaining accurate facility population counts, No psychiatric intervention required. Permanent residency status approved. I'd never seen medical records describing census maintenance duties or permanent residency status for psychiatric patients. But the chart appeared authentic, complete with physician signatures and treatment notations spanning several years. The next morning, I reported the discovery of room 300 and its mysterious occupant to Administrator Williams, Margaret, Ward 3. "Contains rooms 301 through 332, Williams replied, consulting the architectural plans. "There is no room 300 in our facility." I insisted he accompany me to verify the room's existence and examine the patient records. But when we arrived at Ward 3, the space where room 300 had been located showed only a maintenance closet. "This is a storage area," Williams said, opening the door to reveal cleaning supplies and equipment. It's been a closet since the building was constructed, but I had clear memories of entering room 300, observing patient 0, and reviewing his extensive medical chart. The room had been as real as any other patient accommodation in the facility. That evening, I returned to Ward 3 and found room 300 exactly where I'd observed it the previous night. Same layout, same patient, same medical records. But this time, I found a note on the patient chart written in red ink, "Supervisor Chen. Thank you for conducting accurate census counts. Patient 0 appreciates professional documentation that acknowledges his presence. Continue current protocols." Patient 0, the handwriting was neat, professional, and completely different from the medical notations written by hospital staff. But it was signed by the patient himself, despite his apparent inability to write coherent documents. I approached the sleeping figure. "Excuse me, did you write this note?" Patient 0 opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression of profound gratitude. "Supervisor Chen, I want to thank you for including me in the census counts. It's important that I'm properly documented." "What are your census maintenance duties?" I asked. "I ensure that hospitals maintain accurate population records," he replied calmly. "Sometimes institutions lose track of their residents, forget about individuals who need ongoing care. My presence guarantees that someone is always counted, always remembered." "How long have you been here?" "Since the beginning. Since hospitals started keeping census records. Someone has to be patient 0, the baseline count that makes all other numbers meaningful." Our conversation was interrupted by Administrator Williams calling my name from the corridor. When I turned to respond, patient 0 smiled and closed his eyes, returning to his peaceful sleep. Williams approached with security personnel, apparently concerned about my reports of non-existent rooms and phantom patients. "Margaret, you've been working too many consecutive shifts," he said gently. "I think you need some time off to rest and recover." But when they examined the area where room 300 was located, they found only the maintenance closet, exactly as Williams had observed during our previous visit. I was granted 2 weeks of administrative leave, with recommendations for medical evaluation and counseling to address work-related stress. But I kept careful personal records of my census counts, documenting the persistent discrepancy between observed reality and official documentation. When I returned to work, Ward 3's census continued, showing one more patient than physical counts revealed. But I no longer reported the discrepancy, no longer mentioned room 300 or patient 0, no longer questioned why the numbers never aligned. Some hospitals require baseline patients who ensure that census counts never reach 0, that institutions never appear completely empty, that someone is always present to maintain the continuity of care that defines medical facilities. And some census numbers reflect populations that transcend standard admission and discharge procedures, documenting residents whose presence guarantees that hospitals never lose track of their fundamental purpose, providing care for those who can never truly leave. I no longer fight the discrepancy. Each night I complete the census. I write the number is 30, knowing it will always remain so. My pen moves steadily, my signature beneath the red mark of another hand I will not acknowledge aloud. Patient 0 never speaks now, at least not directly, but sometimes, when I pass the corridor where room 300 should be, I hear the faint scratch of writing from behind the closet door. It sounds like census paperwork being filled in. Calm, precise, eternal. I've come to believe that every hospital has its own patient 0, A figure who ensures that numbers never vanish completely, that there is always someone to record, someone to count. Not a ghost in the traditional sense, but a presence bound to the bureaucracy of care itself. So when the totals don't match, when the sheets come back with red ink signatures, I accept them without protest. Because some patients are never discharged. They remain behind every census, every logbook, every chart. And in psychiatric wards especially, the most unsettling truth is this: there is always one more patient than anyone can see.